Hi, my name's Harry, and you're listening to the Fifth Period Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fifth Period, the film podcast hosted by two media teachers, where, after a month off, we are having some major withdrawals without our weekly film breakdowns. I'm talking shakes, sweats, the works. My name is Mr. Brown, and with me as always is...
Mr. Whittle. Welcome back, Mr. Brown. Welcome back to being opposite me at the desk, talking film, talking movies, talking talkies.
I almost don't recognize you, mate. It's been so long. You've got a beard down to your ankles now.
We haven't seen each other at all this entire time.
No.
Yes. The time off did also result in me taking a break from watching a few films, as many as I have previously. I only kind of tackled a quarter of the films that I'd normally do on average in a month. I feel like through bringing the film club back, through bringing the podcast back, I'm going to reinvigorate my love for watching films as well.
Absolutely, and I'm very much in the same position. We did take a break from the podcast, but we were not resting, very, very busy working away with some other things. So it's nice to be back and to be able to just chat film, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, we are going to be going back to our weekly releases, so please make sure you are subscribing if you haven't already done so to stay up to date with what is coming out. And if you want to like and share it around, that also really helps us out too. In addition to our breakdown of Casablanca today, we will also be doing a student appreciation and catching up with our weekly watches and Tantalising Trailers segment. So if you want to skip ahead to any of that, I will leave time codes in the description below.
Excited to get to each and every segment today.
Now, before we jump into our main discussion, I do want to give a quick shout out to Harry for his student intro for today. Harry has become quite the regular at Film Club and has been a big contributor to a lot of winning selections for our weekly film choice. All this time we've been crediting Ethan, but it seems Harry might have been behind the curtain all along.
Ah, right.
I did find out that originally he was planning on doing something a bit different, but he forgot last minute and opted for the more traditional short and sweet intro. I mean, it's a classic, but for anyone who is keen for intros for future weeks, I am all for mixing it up and doing something a bit fun and wacky and out there.
Go seek out Harry if you want suggestions on how you can be wacky on the next intro.
Yeah, well, I don't know what he was planning on doing. I just know that he was planning on doing something different. Right. So that's saved up for a future week.
Very good.
Spoiler warning out for this one?
I mean, technically we should put a spoiler warning out for every film that we talk about on the podcast.
That's very true.
So, yeah, do recommend you join us in the conversation after you've seen the film. But I think there's still something we enjoyed if you haven't seen the film, just listening to us rant on. One of our friends and ex-teacher, Muz, likes having a listen to our podcast. I highly doubt he's watched Casablanca.
I didn't know that he even listened.
He's an advocate for us converting to the video format. He wants to see us in action as well. I said, if you're willing to do all the editing work, Muz, we'd be happy to just film. But yeah, then that's where the request stopped. But yes, you don't have to have seen the film, but it's recommended you do because you may just find the conversation a bit richer.
So Casablanca, 1942. It was one that I have only seen once prior to watching it for the podcast this week, and it was a while ago. And I must say that as soon as I started watching it last night, I immediately had more appreciation for it. Like, I really liked it when I watched it the first time, but I was significantly younger. There was a lot about the film that probably went straight over the top of my head. Even watching it last night, because it's set and filmed during World War II, it made me really interested just to know more of the history of that. And I would say, even with what I know about World War II, it is a fraction of the information that's out there. I really just wanted to go and watch like some docos on World War II to get a bit more insight into all the different battles and all the different areas and what an impact it had on the world overall.
Yeah, I was pretty much the same as you. I have seen the film once before. I wasn't too young when I saw it, maybe about 10 years ago. But the reverse, on this second watching, I didn't enjoy it as much as I recalled enjoying it the first time.
Okay.
Still enjoyable, but like, I don't know, I'm a bit more critical now with knowing what I like and don't like. And again, like you spoke to the era that it came out in, the golden age of cinema, right? Mm-hmm. There's a particular style to Hollywood at this time where it's just different in terms of how it explores ideas, and I generally am not a massive fan of that era. I know you are, reversely.
Yeah.
We've looked at a couple of films from that era now. At least one with North by Northwest.
Yep.
Anything earlier than North?
I don't know. We've definitely talked a lot of that era because we've done a lot of discussions on film noir and student appreciation in general about a film that's a little more dated.
Yeah. I don't want to sound limited because if I liked it, I would like it. But I had a look at my letterboxd and the 1,500 odd films that I've logged there, I think 5% of them were from prior to 1960.
Right.
So I haven't really explored the era a lot either, but I feel like I know generally what would be there. Casablanca was enjoyable for me. We'll get through the film and I'll talk a bit more detail as to what I liked and didn't like as we went along. Certainly the era, the film is set right in the middle of World War II.
Yeah.
And I agree, like it really presents some complex geopolitical kind of stuff that I was previously ignorant to prior to watching the film.
Well, and that's the thing. So the first time I saw it, I would have just tuned it out, I'm sure, and focused on the character study as opposed to the bigger picture in terms of what was going on in the world. But you get a lot of contextual information right at the beginning in the form of a voiceover. So it's set, obviously, in Casablanca, Morocco. Many people are trying to flee Europe during World War II, trying to get to places like Portugal, which was a neutral country during the war, trying to get to America, but getting stuck in an attempt to do that because they can't get an exit visa.
I love that the initial voiceover. I can't remember the full line, but it's something like these summative, like final line is something about waiting. He's like, and wait,
Yeah.
and wait, and wait. Maybe you can cut in the audio there.
Wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait.
But Casablanca in itself is kind of this melting pot of people that are in like a limbo, and there's like, it's a real mishmash of culture there as well. I do feel like how they set up Casablanca as a place really fed into then the narrative that was to come.
Yeah, and it's, even though there are obviously characters that the narrative mainly focuses on, there are constant reminders of how many people are being affected by the circumstances throughout the film. Anytime they walk past someone, you get a line of dialogue in the background referencing how they still haven't been able to get out.
I loved this part of the film where all the little stories that are on the side, like there's a leveling of importance as to what the characters are going through. I really enjoyed the storytelling in that regard, for sure. Yeah.
And then it sets up what's going on. 2 German officers have been found dead. Whoever has murdered them is now located somewhere in Casablanca. And so the authorities are really cracking down, trying to find out who that person is. Captain Renault tells Major Strasser that the murderer will be at Rick's that evening.
Because that character of Ergart, who has the papers that were on the German officers who are now murdered, he was somehow involved in it if he wasn't the murderer himself. How did Renault know that Ergart was going to be there?
So I think Renault is set up very early on in the film as sort of like a corrupt authority figure. He's just in it for himself. Whatever he can get out of a situation, he will. And so I think because of that, he has his ear very close to the ground. He's getting fed information from every angle.
Yeah, that was one assumption. It was either that or just that Rick's is just known as the place where that kind of wheeling and dealing occurs.
Which originally is what it sort of sets it up as, but then by the time he's there later on, he knows directly who to go to.
Yes.
It's not just that he knows he's going to be at that location. I really like that about Renault's character. He's never aligned with Strasser in terms of his ideals and beliefs. He is only ever just like, I'm doing this because for the time being, this is beneficial to me.
Oh, I think that's a really strong theme throughout the whole film is self-interest and that moral ambiguity that Rick faces. Rick is very much just like, I'm not going to tolerate any crap, and I also just going to do what's right for me. And many times throughout the film, until obviously later on.
It's such a staple of films of the time. I mean, in a lot of the noirs, you don't have heroic characters. You have really flawed characters who you don't really sympathize with. Like, they're slightly better than the other characters, but they've got a lot of things that are not great about them as well. And all of this sort of dystopian sensibilities that exist within the characters, the distrust, the self-preservation, all of that sort of stuff was so heavy in these films because they were making these really, really dark films at the time because the world was in a really dark place. And they were essentially saying, well, it could be worse.
Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart, who is pretty much the king when it comes to film noir and the king when it comes to the golden age of cinema, right?
Yeah.
That whole idea of a flawed anti-hero, Bogart epitomizes that.
I mean, his voice.
Yeah.
He's just got the coolest voice, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He is set up as very, very cool and suave as soon as he's introduced. Even before he's introduced, before we even see him, it cuts to his club, which is just the coolest place in the world. And then people are like, oh, we want to drink with Rick. And it's like, oh, Rick would never drink with you. He's too cool for that.
I feel like every shot that Bogart's in, he just commands your attention. I love him on the screen. Something we haven't talked about yet, the director, who is Curtis. Michael Curtis. And whoever his cinematographer were, their love for the tracking and the camera movement. Holy crap, this is a masterclass in camera movement.
It's really, really well done.
So good. And like, it's not overused, it's always done in a sense where it's important and allows us, the audience, to move through Rick's and through the streets of Morocco and like, just, adored it. It just stood out.
My favorite use when they do like a tracking close on a person coming to a realization. It's really, really great to watch.
Yes. If you guys want to see like some really strong camera movement to shift audience attention from one point to another, watch this film. It's just, amazing.
And that's the other thing about these older films. They tend to do longer takes.
Yes.
So you don't necessarily have to always do a cut back and forth between a conversation because the camera moves around the space and the acting tells you the story as opposed to the way that the film is edited.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And that isn't always a negative, but I do think that speaks to something like I'm less inclined to go to a film from this era than a more modern film. These films can be more dialogue heavy. So more reliant on the discussion rather than the action.
Yeah.
The old teacher's statement of show, don't tell. It's like, there's pros and cons to it, but it is a different way of visual storytelling through having something very dialogue focused.
Yeah, see, I mean, I've mentioned this in the podcast many times before. I love heavy dialogue scenes. But not expositional dialogue, like the way that Tarantino uses it, where they're just having a conversation, visually seeing what's important, but we're just hearing how these characters interact with each other. And I feel like that's more what this dialogue is. Like, especially when we're first introduced to Rick, it's a lot of like sarcastic comments and just like really snappy, witty dialogue, which I really enjoy. Like, I love those charismatic characters. We were talking about it with North by Northwest and how he has all that banter with Eva Marie Saint. I really like this era of dialogue in terms of its sharp wit.
It's all necessary and it's delivered in a manner that doesn't seem superficial. Obviously, we look at Renault talking to us about, all of the, this person's coming in and Laszlo will be here. And then, there's a lot of explanation going in. That is true.
Look, to be honest, there's a lot that happens in this film. So I would probably have been very lost without the dialogue there to guide me through it.
You know me well enough to know that if a plot line is overcomplicated, that can lose me as an audience member. This one kept the balance right where the interest remained, because I do think that the through line there of Laszlo and essentially you're invested in Rick pretty much straight away as soon as you meet him. So Rick is kind of the grounding element to this somewhat complex storyline. Not just Rick as well. There's 10 or 12 in the main cast, and they're all important. Even the woman who's playing the guitar next to Sam, more like kind of a flamenco vibe.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought you meant the Yvonne character, but no.
No, not Yvonne, although that's another one, right? Like, all the characters, they've still got importance, even the bartenders and all that stuff. So, yeah, the characters in this film really make it, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's kind of what I was saying before. Anytime someone else comes in, it gives them an opportunity to be involved. It reminds you that this really is a film about the people.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
which is very, very cool.
Yeah.
This is when we find out that the reason that German soldiers have been killed is because they had letters of transit, which is a very, very hot commodity in this particular situation.
Yeah, like so many of the people in Casablanca are kind of in this indirect imprisonment on being there. They aren't able to go to other countries because Morocco is still in this state of flux in terms of it being political, social allowance for people to be there that would otherwise be imprisoned.
Yep.
Which we find out through the flashback to Paris, and we find out from Laszlo, who came from, where was he imprisoned? You know, obviously us trying to recall all the facts demonstrates
this speaks to how complicated it all is.
It's quite complicated, but like still engaging, still enthralling. For me to like want to recall these things demonstrates that, you know, the way the story's told is interesting.
Well, and that's what I mean, like, about wanting to just go and watch, like, a documentary to get more insight into World War II. I am someone who, if I do see a film and that film is talking about something I don't know a whole lot about, it instantly makes me want to go and do more research, just so I can have more of an appreciation for it.
For sure, I'm the same, yep.
So Ogart has the letters. We assume he's the one that's killed the soldiers. And so Renault tells Rick he's going to arrest him. He's going to make that arrest there. And that he's not to interfere with it. And I love how Rick's just like, yeah, why would I interfere with it? He's very much established as he's just looking out for himself early on in the film.
I'd stick my neck out for nobody.
I do find it interesting that when they do go to make the arrest and Ogart goes right up to Rick and like pleads for his help.
That's the first explicit instance where we see Rick has an opportunity to do what others would deem morally right. He's like, nope. You've dug your own hole.
I don't really know what he was expected to do in that scenario. Like, his hands are kind of tied at that point, right?
I agreed. Like, I was... Because I had forgotten whether he actually helps out Ergard or not. So when that comes up, I'm like, surely there's not enough time for Rick to take any action. Unless he's got some, like, dummy wall in the cafe or something like that he can just like throw him in. Like, I don't know where Ergard is. Yeah, but the reality is it was pretty limited as well, for sure.
Yeah, and we get like a couple of little character moments between the bartender and Yvonne.
I love that bartender as well.
And he loves Yvonne.
Yes, that's right.
Because Yvonne, I love you.
Oh, shut up.
All right. For you, I shut up. Because Yvonne, I love you.
Quirky character, that one. Him and the other bald one with the spectacles.
Oh my God, he's got such a good line. Hang on, I made a note of it. It's when he asks, make sure that Strasser gets a good table. And he goes, I've already given him the best table knowing he's German and he would have taken it anyway. Just fun characters. And you can tell they all really adore Rick. Rick is put on a pedestal very early on in the film.
Yeah, obviously we find out that Sam's worked for Rick for quite some time, but even that aside, like, Carl is the name of the maitre d' character.
Right.
Yep. Smitten by Rick as well, willing to do whatever he requires. So Rick is set up as this complex character because we see him pushing off any kind of moral high road with how he could help others. But at the same time, we've got these characters that adore him. So he must have previously shown some kind of soft side or something to them. Well, we see it later on when the bars closed down and he said, keep paying everyone's wages. Yeah. So little things like that, I think. Yeah.
Got that heart of gold underneath.
Yes, that's it.
He says this great line when Yvonne asks him, what about last night? And he's like, that was so long ago, he doesn't even remember. And then she's like, all right, what about tonight? And he goes, I never make plans that far in advance. It's just like, everything he says is so quick and sarcastic.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if it's a fair analysis to make, but I'm going to make it anyway. Do you think that there was a touch too much of a similarity in the look of Yvonne and Ilsa? They look like very similar characters facially. Now, Ilsa is our main female lead, but
Ingrid Bergman?
Yeah, played by Ingrid Bergman. To look at them, I'm like, they look very similar.
I would speculate it's suggesting that he's never really gotten over her. And so he's trying to fill the void.
Yes.
But because she pales in comparison to his love, he is kind of like, no, that's enough.
Good insight. Absolutely.
In addition to Renault telling Rick about the arrest before it happens, he also mentions about Laszlo, the Czech activist who is a threat to the rising prominence of Nazi Germany. And so he says, when he arrives here, you have to keep him here. And so when he does arrive, much to Rick's surprise, his wife is someone from Rick's past. He's shooketh, if you will.
A big coincidence, right?
Yeah.
In terms of a plot point, what do you think about that?
I could overlook it.
I mean, it allows for the romance factor to really set in as well, doesn't it? Like, because you can't overlook the importance of the romantic element of this story.
And if you also think about where they've both come from in Paris, and they're now both looking for an escape to America and a place to kind of hide out in the meantime, that is sort of where everyone ends up. Perhaps that's...
Yeah. Oh, no, look, I wasn't totally distracted by it, but it did come across... I think Ilsa says along the lines of, I would never have come here if I knew it was your place.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
imagine that, Rick working at a place called Rick's.
big sign on the front that says Rick's American Cafe. Yeah.
Should have made it more obvious.
Yeah.
We find out they knew each other from their past. We don't get the full story just yet. We also know that they both knew Sam in their past. She asked him to play the song, which is the famous misquote, "Play it again, Sam." She says, "Play it once, Sam, for old time's sake." Mm-hmm. I actually realized as I was watching this through, like, there are so many iconic lines from this film as it's going through. I mean, I'll mention them as they come up, but I was really keen for this moment because I remembered that it had that misquote, and I was like, oh, what does she actually say that it's being confused with? And I couldn't even pinpoint which is the moment that's the misquote, because they say like 3 or 4 variations on "Play It Again, Sam" in a very short space of time.
I love Sam as a character as well.
Oh, he's charming
just
too.
Just cool.
He's cool.
Yeah.
I also like how he looks out for Rick, and he knows that now that Ilsa's back, Rick is just going to be a mess.
Oh, there's an absolute camaraderie between the two of them where they're looking out for each other, for sure.
After they've seen each other again, and we've been introduced to this really, really cool version of Rick, he's just paired right back to this pathetic, mopey character pining after Ilsa.
That's the power of love, isn't it?
Well, that's it. It's a curious thing.
Make a one man weep, make another man sing.
Please cut that in.
Yeah, will do. Even then, there's that camaraderie because Sam's like, I was about to leave, but I can see you're a mess, so I'm going to stick around and make sure that I get you home.
Sam's got his back.
But that's when we get yet another iconic line. Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. Like, it's such a good line.
Yep.
That's when we get the flashback of them, and it starts with the really cheesy rear projection of them driving in the car. But the longer it went on, I was like, I really buy this romance.
Yeah.
But the German army is approaching, and it's not safe for Rick to be in Paris.
I didn't get around to this. Did you do any research to try and find a historical timeline on this as to when was Paris invaded by the Germans, and therefore how many years prior to 1942 did the two of them meet and then have to separate? I know it was early on generally in the World War II, but like
39 was when it started.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 years that it could have happened within, and he's had the time to open up his own club.
Yeah, so that was more why I wanted to know was Rick goes to Casablanca and sets up the bar. I would assume like a year or two is at least passed. You know?
I mean, even just the contract work to get that Rick sign up. That's going to take some time.
Yes.
So he has to leave for his own safety from Paris before the Germans invade. He suggests that they leave together, and unfortunately, she never shows. So Rick and Sam end up going off on their own. The symbolism, like when they kiss for the last time in the flashback, like they knock over the champagne. It's not going to end well. I really appreciated the sequence of him like moping in the bar to really hammer home that kind of flawed protagonist.
Yeah.
Like he's not perfect, and you saw that in a lot of noir too. These characters that always looked like they had their cool, and then something goes wrong and all of a sudden they crumble.
And like he's super sulky even like while that flashback's occurring and then afterwards. But then Ilsa comes into that scene, and the way he speaks to her is pretty mean, and like I understand he's emotional and stuff, but he's pretty jerky then as well.
Oh, for sure.
Which kind of speaks again to the flawed character.
But it's not even jerky, it's just childish too.
Yeah, yep.
I find it very funny too, because he goes from this state to the following day when he's with her. He's just like, yeah, but I'm sober now, so we can have a conversation properly now. Don't worry about that. I was just drunk.
Blame it on the alcohol.
It speaks to I think how a lot of people will blame alcohol for.
Oh yeah,
acting.
it's a timeless thing, but I think even more so in that era as well.
For
where
sure.
it's gone, oh yeah, well he was drunk, so it's fine.
I mean, he's not sober the next day, but he just says he's had less to drink.
Yes.
He's always got to be on at least a couple of bourbons. Although I noted he pronounces bourbon funny in this.
There was a weird.
It was like Boybin or
Boybin.
Boybin.
The story had me a little confused. Maybe it was a bourbon.
The following day, Renault threatens Laszlo. You're never going to be able to leave. You might as well just settle in for a while. Laszlo's not having a bar of it. He storms out. And while they're chatting, Ilsa and Rick end up catching up, and Rick's like, okay, we can talk now. And she's like, no, I don't want to talk. The only explanation I'll provide you is that I was married at the time we got together. I'm still married now, and that's the end of it.
Yep.
And of course, Rick handles this very well. He's not happy about it.
Yeah, to the point where he won't be giving up those papers.
No. In fact, Ferrari, he's a fun character, I reckon.
Yeah?
Yeah, you don't like him?
Remind me who Ferrari is.
Ferrari's the guy that's always wearing like the white suit, and he's the one that suspects that Rick has the document.
During the day he goes to Ferrari's cafe?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yep.
Yeah, so he offers Ilsa an out, but he's like, but I won't be able to get Laszlo out. And she's like, well, I'm not going without him. So you do see that she really does care for him. Mm-hmm. Again, we don't have the full story of what's happened in terms of why she was with Rick, if she was married, and all of that sort of stuff at this point. But you get real indications of the fact that she cares for both of them dearly.
I think my perception was that she cares more for Laszlo in terms of his importance as a political power. Yeah, so she and this film generally speaks to the idea of sacrifice, where she's willing to let Laszlo go if it means that he can go have that power to disrupt the German force and stuff like that. There's a lot of ideas that are based around sacrifice in the film.
Yeah, and I do think the two are probably intertwined. Like, she probably does love him because of what he stands for as well. And there's a moment later on, which we'll get to, where you can see a real admiration in her eyes as she's watching him.
Oh, speaking about her eyes, like the lighting is used so well to have her eyes glistening with tears building up. And that's on top of like how soft the camera lens was on pretty much every profile shot of her. She as an actor did really well to convey that emotion, the complexity of uncertainty and like being torn between two loves and all that stuff. So she's great, but then they use the lighting to accentuate it as well, showing the importance of seeing those tears build up in her eyes a lot. Yeah.
It's at this point they go back to Rick's place, and we meet a woman who is desperate to talk to Rick about how trustworthy Renault is. Trustworthy in inverted commas. I feel like this is a really great sequence for two reasons. It reaffirms that there's so many other people in similar situations just trying to get out of Casablanca, but it also reestablishes that Rick is a good person. Like, he's had a couple of scenes where he hasn't looked so great, and then here's a sequence where he becomes the hero again and really steps in.
Yep.
Essentially what is happening here is that Renault, being a really, really dodgy character and trying to just look out for himself, what he does is, if there are people who cannot afford to pay for their visas, he essentially propositions the women in order to...
So gross.
It's disgusting, right?
When that is first established with that parting line from the scene where there was one of his soldiers comes in and says, "Oh, there's an issue with one of the visas," and he starts fixing his tie and says, "Show her in." I'm like, "Oh, yuck!" Yeah.
Again, that's kind of the whole point of the film, is to show how desperate so many people are to get out of this situation.
Yes. Yep.
And so this woman comes to Rick, not for help, but just to confirm that if she does go through with this, that Renault will follow up with his end of the deal.
Which Renault said to go and speak to Rick.
Yeah.
So Renault already knows, or is assuming
he
that
already Renaults.
Yeah. Thank you. First pun since our return. Well
it's
done.
good to be back.
Yeah. Renault's of the mind that Rick will vouch for him. So there's kind of like an assumed kind of alliance there.
Yeah, which we kind of get hinted at throughout the film.
But I feel like Rick's a reluctant participant in that alliance as well.
Well, certainly for this particular act.
Yes, for this one as well.
Whereas for other things, he's kind of like, all right, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, sort of thing. But for this in particular, you can tell he's just disgusted by it.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. He knows that her husband is in the other room trying to win the money in order for them to be able to afford the visa. And so he goes in and he rigs the roulette table so that he'll be able to win. Mm-hmm. The characters around the bar then come up to Rick and they're like, oh, well done. Like, you're so such a good
nice
guy.
Yeah.
Then we get maybe one of my favorite sequences in the film. Laszlo, he's found out from Ferrari that Rick has the letters of transit and he tries to buy them off him, but Rick won't sell them, obviously because he's being a bit petty from the information he's found out earlier. But afterwards, Laszlo leaves Rick's office and all the Germans have gathered around the piano and they're singing the German national anthem. And Laszlo like marches down the stairs, goes over to the rest of the musicians and gets them to play the French national anthem.
Yep.
And the entire bar rallies and sings it so they completely drown out the German soldiers.
The idea of like representing power in numbers and symbolizing the united front, that all these people are against the German forces. Yeah, very, very strong moment in the film, for sure.
Epic. And it really speaks to why it's so important. You mentioned earlier how they introduce all these little characters around the bar. It makes that scene so much more powerful that we're seeing it sung by characters that we've seen have little moments earlier on. Mm-hmm. It's not a faceless group. These are all people we can get behind. It's just, it's very, very well done. It's such a great sequence. It really makes you like Laszlo.
Yeah. No, at no point do I dislike Laszlo, but that point is when we, the audience, become really aware of his importance to something beyond just his self-interest and what he's seeking from Rick and from Casablanca. It's because he has a role to play in the war. Yeah.
And this is when we see Ilsa looking at him glassy-eyed.
Yep.
She couldn't admire him more.
Yeah.
Like, it's all in that facial expression. And it does that track in.
At the end of this is also a cut to Yvonne. She goes, Viva la France! Yeah. I love it.
In retaliation to that, they make Rick close the cafe down. And I really like it too because Strasser goes up to Renault and he's like, close it down. And he's like, for what? I have no authority to be able to do it. And he's like, make something up. And so he ends up closing them down because there's gambling going on, even though he's an active participant in the gambling.
While he's doing it, he goes, oh, here's your payout. And he's like, oh, thank you.
Good.
Yes, close it down.
I love it. And he goes, I'm shocked to find there's gambling going on here. You're winning, sir. Oh, thank you very much. Strasser also threatens Laszlo to Ilsa. So the situation becomes more and more urgent. Originally, it was like, okay, so they're not going to be able to get out of Casablanca. But now it's like, they might not even survive the night kind of thing. Like, he really puts the hard word on Ilsa about, it's a dangerous place. People die all the time in Casablanca.
Yeah. Human life is pretty cheap around here.
So as a result of that, Ilsa becomes quite desperate to get the letters of transit from Rick. Mm-hmm. And so she goes to him to appeal to his good nature.
When they're out of the bar and they go to like Rick's back room or upstairs, whatever, the lighting is really strong. Like they use a lot of shadows and lighting through windows. Very noir.
Oh, super noir.
Yeah.
And I would say that a lot of the elements of this film could be considered film noir. I wouldn't categorize this as a film noir.
No, not in terms of the overarching genre, but certainly film elements like, the lighting, for instance.
For sure.
Certainly a nod towards noir.
She goes to Rick, we were in love once, and he goes, I wouldn't bring up Paris. That's poor salesmanship.
Yes, I love that line.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Why are you reminding me of the fact that you left me?
In that pouring rain in that scene as well. Like, he's drenched. I love that even when they cut to the letter, in that Paris flashback, like the ink's running down the page.
Yeah.
Like
he's got his hat sopping wet, his trench coat, more like drench coat, am I right? But it's heavy symbolism, but it's very effective.
Yes.
Like, everything's so much sadder when you're in pouring rain.
Yes.
But yes, she pulls a gun on Rick at this point, and no one's buying it, right?
No, but
She wasn't gonna shoot
It's
Rick.
still effective in showing the level of desperation she's feeling. Like, she's really invested in getting Laszlo out of there. Yeah.
But she ends up crumbling and falling into his arms. So there was a gun in her pocket, but she was still happy to see it. Ilsa tells him the full story and gives more of an explanation. It's all just a misunderstanding. That was a common theme, characters' distrust and things like that. If everyone just sat down and had a nice long chat, we could fix this all in about 20 minutes.
Yes.
But yeah, she explains that when she met Rick, she thought her husband was dead at the time. He'd been captured and she'd heard word that he was dead. And so she was obviously really distraught. She met Rick. She actually fell in love with Rick. And then right before they were about to leave Paris together, she found out that her husband was alive. And she needed to stay with her husband because he was badly injured, but also for the cause. And she couldn't involve Rick in that because she was worried for his safety. So all of a sudden, she's completely redeemed herself. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'll give him the documents.
Yeah.
He'll be able to leave. But she does admit that it was too hard leaving Rick once and she won't be able to do it again. So it seems as though she's going to be staying in Casablanca with Rick while Laszlo makes his escape.
Yeah.
For now.
It seems that way. Yeah.
Then Laszlo arrives at the bar, and this was when I noticed the shadow work. Like, you know, you're saying lighting is really, really well done. When Rick's with Ilsa, she's in the light, and then as soon as Laszlo arrives, the door closes in front of her, and like the shadow completely casts over her face.
Yep. And because this is at the point where the bar's been closed down as well, right?
Yeah.
So Laszlo is downstairs at the bar while Rick's upstairs with Ilsa, pretends to get Carl upstairs for some other reason, but then Laszlo is downstairs with, who's he with? I think he's with Renault someone's downstairs.
No, Rick goes downstairs to talk to Laszlo.
Oh, yes, because Ilsa and Laszlo are separated at that point. Something I like about this film in general is that in terms of like a rising tension, it's gradual. I think you touched on it before, but just to reiterate, like there's no massive turning points. It's all just this incremental build in terms of complexity and the drama and the tension. And it's kind of different. And I really enjoyed that element of it. Suddenly we're in like the climactic finale of it. Wait, when did we get to this point? Yeah.
One thing about not having a lot of editing in the film, like a lot of quick cuts, but also no color in the film, it means that you can concentrate on other aspects of the film.
Yes.
So I notice lighting in a black and white film far more than I notice it in a film that's in color.
Yeah.
There's something really nice about that because you kind of go, well, I'm focusing on different aspects of the film to what I might focus on if I was to watch a modern day film. I found the dialogue really poetic, the camera movement really great, the lighting really great. And that's not necessarily something that would be completely lost on me, but I wouldn't focus nearly as much on it if I was being distracted by other film techniques.
Yep.
There's something nice about having a variety of different types of films that you watch in order to get a really broad range of different film techniques.
Yeah, and selective appreciation from film to film.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yep.
Laszlo, at this point, confronts Rick about him loving Ilsa. I giggled a little bit when I was watching this because it presents him as so, like, intuitive for picking it up. Like, as soon as they meet, everyone's like, oh, you already know each other. And I reckon even Renault says something like, oh, I was jealous of the way she was looking at you. And obviously something's happened with them in the past.
Yeah.
I don't know why he's, like, acting as if it's this big reveal. Anyways, Laszlo then gets arrested and Rick then decides to go to Renault and he appeals to him saying, look, if you let him go, I'll offer to sell him the exit visa documents and then you can catch him in the act doing that. And then you'll be able to arrest him for a much bigger crime. Because what you've got him on at the moment, that's not going to hold him.
Yep.
So this will be much better for you. You'll come off looking great to Strasser. And Rick sort of justifies it as him saying, yeah, because then you'll get him out of the picture and I can run off with Ilsa. And so Renault's like, yep, I buy it. Let's do it. And so it does get set up, but Rick ends up pulling the gun on Renault. It was all an elaborate ruse.
He got rickrolled.
He did. Nice. And he gets him to call ahead to the airport to give approval for the letters of transit, but he pulls the old switcheroo back on Rick and he ends up calling Strasser instead. They head off to the airport, and this is probably the most iconic set piece of the film.
Yeah.
If people talk Casablanca, it's always that foggy airport sequence with the big trench coat and the hat. And so at the airport, Rick tells Ilsa she thinks she's going to be staying behind with Rick, and he says, no, you have to go. He's trying to protect her, but he also thinks that the life that she will lead and the cause that she will be working towards is far more important than their romance. Mm-hmm. Very selfless act.
Sacrifice.
Well, he's gone full sacrifice now because he's really jeopardizing himself by letting them go, especially because he's letting them go with the only 2 letters of transit that he has, meaning he will be trapped in Casablanca and at the very least be arrested, but probably worse.
Trapped.
A very small fraction of our listeners will understand that. I'll still leave it in. You're welcome, Javier. Another great line that we get here, we'll always have Paris. I had forgotten that was from this film. I mean, they reuse it in a lot of things and just sub in whatever they'll always have. We'll always have dessert.
We'll always have this podcast, Mr. Brown.
Always. This is when we get the other iconic line, and it's been said about 5 or 6 times throughout the film at this point, but it's a really nice send-off for the last time that Rick is going to see Ilsa. He says, here's looking at you, kid.
Yeah, so we first hear it in the flashback, which really kind of firms it up as like it's a love language between the two of them. They're like, it's a line that shows Rick's adoration to her. When it's then delivered again at the end of the film, it's re-establishing how much love is between these two characters. Yeah.
Oh, look, I really like the line. I actually think it was overused in the film. I feel like if they'd used it in the flashback and then used it again at the end, it would be a really nice kind of bookending of their relationship.
When else did they use it?
He says it at least 2 more times.
He says it 3 times in the flashback.
I reckon he says it at least 2 more times post-flashback. So, like, just...
I must have missed it.
Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at you, kid.
Yeah, so it takes away some of the sweetness of the line.
There you go.
But yeah, this was another, like, great use of camera. Lots of, like, track-ins. And it's starting to get a little hectic too, because we know that Strass is on his way to this airport as well to potentially stop them. He arrives and tries to call in to get the plane to stop, but Rick guns him down. It's a really cool gunshot. Rick's calm about it the whole time. He's like, put the gun down. All right, whatever, bang. Like, it's not a desperate kind of situation. He's just like, all right, I'll shoot you. I don't care. Renault covers for him as well.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the devious nature of Renault that he'll just realign his allegiance wherever the self-interest lies, right?
For sure.
After Rick kills
Strasser.
Like, that's where it's going to work out for both of them. Why not, right?
For sure. Yeah. And that's what I was saying, like, earlier, you don't think Renault is particularly fond of Strasser. And I think at times throughout the film, he even says to Rick, like, I don't really like him either, but it's just like, he's the authority figure, so I'm following along. Like, that'll help me the best.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when he's like, okay, well, I'm no longer going to be blamed for this because Strass has been shot and murdered. So I have no reason to turn Rick in because Rick helps me out. We can go back to whatever relationship we had previously.
A lot of the film, the character decisions in the film are based around self-interest and being opportunistic because of the desperate nature they find themselves in. So again, the setting's important. It's in the middle of the war. Like, I don't think I would have done anything different to what Rick or Renault would have done in those situations.
I can think of a few things they would have done
Well, yeah,
different.
Renault, I'm not going to agree with every decision Renault made. But yeah. In terms of aligning at the end there, for sure.
Yeah. You must have been fond of this. Quick wrap-up.
Yeah.
You love a quick wrap-up.
Yes, and like, not only the quick wrap-up, but like what I was talking about in terms of how the narrative build kind of just takes you to that climactic ending, and it's like, wow, here we are. It's really neat, it's effective, and then they walk off into the fog.
I also like that even though it's uplifting that they've gotten away, it's also not a super happy ending for Humphrey Bogart's character, for Rick, because love got away.
Yeah.
I like films in this era where it's like, okay, well, there's some good things, but it's not all good.
Well, and rightly so, because like in this particular film, again, it's the middle of World War II. Like, you know, like, we're not going to have happy endings for years to come.
Although there were musicals being released at the same time.
So the film, in all, a complex political commentary, as well as being a really strong character piece, good elements of romance in there, the flawed anti-hero vibes, like
Witty dialogue.
Yeah. There's a lot going for it. So at the start of this podcast, I made it out like maybe I wasn't a fan of the film. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first watch, but I did thoroughly enjoy the film.
And look, films of this era, if you don't enjoy them, they can really feel like they drag.
Yeah.
More so than modern films,
Yeah.
because you don't have as many kind of distracting elements. It's like you either are invested in the plot or you're not.
Yeah.
And hour 40, how long's the runtime on
40,
this?
yeah.
Yeah, so almost a tight 90.
Yeah.
Tight like a tiger.
But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was really glad that this one was on there, and really glad that the students picked something, because this was all based on a voting system. And yeah, this one was a clear winner in terms of what the students wanted. So either they'd seen it before and they liked it, or they're really trying to get into a wider variety of cinema, which is great.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
I hope Ollie watched it.
No pressure, but pressure.
Yeah, I think he will. He's trying to challenge himself. Alrighty, should we move on to our weekly watches?
I was going to say let's with the wh at the start. Let's.
Weekly watches. Weekly watches. I love you.
Alrighty, well, because we have been off for quite some time, so over a month now, there were obviously a lot of movies and TV shows that we would have watched in that time. So I've got three sections for movies and 3 for TV as well. Yeah, I narrowed it down. There was so many things that I've seen in the last month, like bits and pieces here or there. So I tried to pick the ones that I thought I'd have a good talking point for.
Yeah, I'm going to go with just the movies I watched over the last week. There have been other movies here and there between when we last podcasted and now, but staying true to the title being Weekly Watches, I will talk to the 5 films that I've watched over the last week.
Well, I watched them in one of the weeks.
Yes, you watched them in a week. Yeah.
Well, look, I'll kick things off with the Dial of Destiny, just because I know how much you love Harrison Ford.
I love you.
I know.
And also because we've talked a lot of Indiana Jones in previous podcasts, not just the one dedicated to Indiana Jones, but there's been a lot of anticipation for the Dial of Destiny with our Tantalising Trailers segments as well. So I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan. You, sir, are not, but we both had high hopes going into this one. You still haven't seen it.
No, I think like once the film came out and the reviews were generally poor for it, they kind of cemented that I'm just going to wait until it's on the streaming services.
But I thought for curious souls out there who want to know what my thoughts were on it, I wasn't overly impressed. It was okay. I would say it was fine. Controversially, I feel like a lot of people are saying that it's better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the 4th film that was critically panned. But I actually disagree, and I think there's a few reasons why Harrison Ford's age plays a big role in it, and how active his action sequences can be in a film that does rely on those sorts of sequences. But also, everyone knows there's CGI littered throughout it, but the opening sequence is a younger Indiana Jones de-aged. And while that has moments that are very, very impressive, I would say it's ultimately distracting and really, really takes away from what could be a cool sequence, because you're just like, oh, I can't get past how that looks visually.
Right.
So yeah, for a franchise that was so praised for its practical effects, it's a shame that the last 2 entries into the series have been so heavily filtered with CGI. So that's the Dial of Destiny. Not a terrible film, but certainly my least favorite Indiana Jones film.
First one on the list for me is a rewatch, The Fifth Element.
Oh, I love The Fifth Element.
Yeah, so do I. It certainly sits in one of my top films. I've seen this film a bunch of times. I just love the energy of it, the color of it.
The cast?
The cast. I have huge love for Bruce Willis. Like, maybe not so much in his latter kind of what he's doing these days. Like,
You mean everything?
yeah, where he's just willing to sign up for 5 movies a year.
Yeah.
That-
Well, not anymore, but
not
for a
anymore.
while he was doing everything that was offered to him.
But I would argue that this is peak Willis. Like, this is 97, 98. So Fifth Element, a fantastic science fiction film that has a lot of like kind of lore that gets built into the story as well. Chris Tucker
always gets a bit of a bad rap from people, but in this particular film, it's made for him, that role.
so good. Mila Jo, I can't pronounce her surname.
I'm not even going to try.
From the Mila or whoever from Resident Evil, she's fantastic in it as well. The whole film is just a delight. So The Fifth Element was a great rewatch.
The next thing that I'm going to mention, I haven't had a chance to tell you this because you've been away the last couple of days. Guess who has gone down the Barbie rabbit hole? As in not the new Barbie film, but the old animated Barbie film. Wait, you probably don't need to guess. It's me. It's me, yeah. But
Wait. So wait, Barbie what?
which ones?
You're calling them films.
Oh, I see.
Right.
I see. Mr. Whittle doesn't consider animated films to be films.
No. Animated films I consider to be films. These are just like straight to video, like novelty kind of cartoons.
Daria, who has been on the podcast for an intro previously, has expressed great interest in the Barbie franchise and is very much hoping that a Barbie film makes it onto the list. And I don't think that that's going to happen. I mean, I hope for her sake that it does, but based on our audience, I'm not sure it's going to get the votes to make it onto Film Club or the podcast. So I thought I would do her a favor and just go and check out some of the Barbie films myself. And
I'm sure you're riveted.
oh, very much so. Well, I've dipped my toe in the Barbie waters, especially with the Barbie Mermaid Tale one. They're not my kind of films, surprisingly, but look, they're a bit of fun, I suppose. I could understand how if you grew up on them as a kid that you'd have a lot of fondness for them.
Nostalgia plays a big part into anything, and like I've not seen one of the Harry Potter films, but I don't besmirch people's adoration for the Harry Potter franchise.
Yeah.
Same for these. Like, you know, just because I didn't grow up with them doesn't mean that they don't hold a very special place for others. But I'm kind of looking at it more through a general lens. And
Yeah.
you know me well enough to know that I'll go and give pretty much anything a crack.
Woo! Then you've got to watch one of these.
No, because they're not filmed.
Well, they are.
They're just cartoons. Yes.
I thought I'd give them a go, and I must say that Daria seemed very, very pleased that I had checked those out. So hopefully I've made her proud in that regard.
That's the best you're going to get, Daria. Second one for me is a film that we had to watch. Well, I didn't have to watch, but a film that's coming into our school as a text that we're going to study in one of the year levels, and I'd never actually seen it. So it's Bend It Like Beckham.
You've never seen Bend It Like Beckham?
No. So a very popular film at the time. It was released in 2002.
Maybe I studied it. I feel like I did definitely watch it in high
It
school.
certainly does the rounds. Like it was, we selected it based on a text list of what other schools are doing. So we're bringing that in for our year 9s. But I'd never watched it. I thought it was okay, very of its time in terms of some of the ideas around gender roles and stuff like that. It does challenge some stuff, but it doesn't.
Culture and gender, right?
Yes, culture and gender, but like I think it manages the cultural aspect a bit better than it does the gender stuff. It didn't go as far as it could in terms of challenging gender norms, but it still helps, like it's helpful in that regard. As a film in itself, it's pretty clunky with the laughs it's going for, and like, yeah, I didn't overly enjoy it. Not terrible. I'm sure the kids will generally find it okay. The themes are there to be explored in terms of a text for study. But yeah, as a film, I was a bit so-so on it.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. The coach from Bend It Like Beckham, he was actually in one of the Mission Impossible films. He's in the third one. He's the Irish guy. All I ever do is copy.
Rhys Myers? Something
Yeah,
like
that
that.
sounds right.
Yeah.
I would love for him to make a return to the Mission Impossible franchise.
Anyway, we'll get to that.
We're getting to it right now because my next two on the list are Rogue Nation and Fallout.
Ah, very good.
So I'm seeing Mission Impossible tomorrow night, and I am very, very excited. So just to get me extra geared up, I watched Rogue Nation 2 nights ago, and I watched Fallout last night. I'm really, really excited for it. Seems like the reviews are great. Big blockbuster cinema is back in full force. Yeah, I loved rewatching Rogue Nation and Fallout. It's really interesting because Rogue Nation for me is my second from the bottom of my list of Mission Impossible films, but it really speaks to how high the bottom is for that one to be so low down. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so just to segue in, I saw the new Mission Impossible yesterday. Can't say too much because I'm waiting for you to see it so we can have a thorough discussion about it. But I too put Rogue Nation and Fallout in terms of a ranking towards the bottom of the six, the first six. Dead Reckoning being the new one, number 7 in the franchise. But I still love both of these films, Rogue Nation and Fallout.
Yeah, well, isn't it interesting? Yeah. I feel like the expression, the best of a bad bunch gets thrown around a lot. But in this case, it's the worst of a good bunch.
Yeah, yep.
Oh, except the second one. That's just bad.
Yesterday, I had the luxury of having a day off from work. And I went and saw 2 films back to back at the cinema. One of them being Mission Impossible, which nearly 3 hours long. But you don't feel it too bad.
I won't feel it. I'll be give me another hour.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with the pacing and the engagement. Yeah, I've got a lot of things to say about it. Don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil your experience on it. Overall, enjoyed it. The third of the Christopher McQuarrie films in the franchise. Got one more to come because this is Dead Reckoning Part 1. So maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more once you've seen it next week.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yep. The other film, I was reminded of this yesterday, the indulgence of seeing 2 movies in a row at the cinema, I loved it. I have done it a few times before. I was, in fact, trying to find a third film that worked into the time for yesterday, but alas, it didn't happen. So Mission Impossible was the second film I saw yesterday. The first one was Talk to Me, the new Australian horror film. We've talked about this on Tantalising Trailers a couple of times, I think.
You have talked to me about it.
Again, this is one that I'm waiting on Mr. Brown to watch as well, so I won't talk too much about it, but again, adored it.
Well, it must have been even nicer having seen these films back to back, knowing that I was currently at work.
Yeah, you and all my other colleagues, knowing that, you were busy doing work while I was enjoying the reclining seats of Pentridge Palace Cinemas.
I wouldn't worry about it. I was phoning it in.
Yeah.
Next on my list, I'm just going to chat very, very quickly about some TV shows I was watching. I was going to talk Secret Invasion, but it's just such a nothing show. I'm not even sure it's worth mentioning. So instead, I will focus my attention on Black Mirror and Silicon Valley. So I'll do Silicon Valley first, because you've never seen it, have you?
No, I've seen Silicon Valley.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
First 3-4 seasons of the 3 seasons?
I think there's 6 seasons of it, and I reckon it's probably worth returning to, because I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So I ended up watching that over the holidays and binged most of it.
It's good fun.
I really love Tom Middleditch, who's the main character in it. Saw his special with Ben Schwartz.
Yes.
And it's phenomenal.
So it's an improv special, isn't it?
Yeah. They're coming out with a new one later this year.
Very cool.
I really love it. So when I came across Silicon Valley and I saw that Tom Middleditch was the main character in it, I instantly jumped on it. And it's so good.
But come on. TJ Miller steals every scene he's in.
He does,
He's so funny in that show.
Perhaps that's why you stopped watching when you did, because TJ Miller does exit the show about halfway through its run.
Sounds about right.
It definitely is a tonal shift, but I still think the show is solid all the way to the end. Yeah. But yeah, it's basically just about the tech capital in California, and all of these nerds just trying to invent the next big thing.
Yep.
The other one that I wanted to talk about was Black Mirror, because you also watched that recently.
I've watched most of the new season. I think I've still got the last one pending.
The reason I wanted to bring up Black Mirror, if you've never seen the show before, I heavily encourage you to go check it out, because watching the new season got me really excited about all the old episodes again. I ended up going back and watching 90% of the ones that had been released previously. Yeah. I just think it is such a good show. And even episodes that I thought, that wasn't as good, upon a rewatch, it's made me completely reevaluate my ranking of them. In fact, on Letterboxd, as just a fun task afterwards, I mean, it's fun for me making this, I ended up ranking every episode of Black Mirror. Yeah, I found it really, really interesting how within a few years, my perception of the episodes and which ones I thought were better or worse have completely changed. And I think it comes down to what the social commentary is and like how the world is and what it's trying to say about the world. If things have changed for me personally, if things have changed about the state of the world, then I read the message of the episode in a completely new light. And so it's interesting how things that are being released so long ago or set in completely different eras can become so relevant all over again based on what's going on. If you haven't checked out Black Mirror, I really, really encourage you to. And I encourage you to check out 2 or 3 episodes before you make up your mind on it, because it is an anthology series. All the episodes are different. And some episodes might be hit and miss in terms of whether you enjoy them or don't. But yeah, I feel like it's the kind of show that has something for everyone, whether it's in one episode or the next.
I've got one last film for weekly watchers, and that is, again, a recent cinema release that Mr. Brown hasn't seen yet, so I won't talk too much to it, although you've probably heard more about this one than the others. That's Barbie. So
yes.
The Barbie film as opposed to the Barbie cartoons.
Well, that's why I've been catching up on the whole Barbie cinematic universe, so that I can be up to date. The Barbieverse, yes.
This film, absolutely recommend. Like, I had a great fun time with it. Spoken with many students about it. Like, the students have really enjoyed it as well. Very strong kind of message around feminist ideology as well as toxic masculinity, and also the film itself is fun. Yeah, again, you haven't seen it, so I don't want to talk into the greater detail of it, but I do highly recommend checking out Barbie.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it, and I'm particularly excited having heard that it does have a really strong message, and the fact that some people have come away from it really moved by it. Like, that excites me.
Yeah.
And not everyone is saying that. Like, I've had other people who have said, I don't really understand why people have been so moved by it. And I think that's because people sort of see their own stories in it, and that reflects how they're feeling about a certain situation. So depending on context of how you've lived your life and what you get from the film and how you see yourself in it, you're going to interpret it completely different.
I feel
to
that
other people.
speaks to the general power of the film, in that it's been a great conversation starter, confronting for people in different ways, complexity in the message to the point where I did have a criticism as to how clear the messaging is.
Okay.
Being able to use that as a conversation starter with people who've seen it, and like, what did you take from it? What did you think the messaging was? It's been a lot of fun talking about the film afterwards, which really speaks a lot about the film itself. Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to Tantalising Trailers.
Trailers. Tantalizing films. Trailers. Don't know if we will be a fan. How will it be? We'll know in time.
We sure will. So first on my list is one that you have watched, and this is the only one that's on my list that technically wasn't from the last week, and this is Wonka.
Yes.
Ew.
Yeah. Just there's something about it. I'm finding it hard to put into words. I have spoken to you about when I watched it that I don't like that setting of that ye old English, even though it's set in America, but it's still got that start of industrialization kind of vibe. And those settings I'm not really a fan of.
Whereas I love those settings, but that is not what I had an issue with.
What did you have an issue with? Are you able to pinpoint it?
I just don't care about the story, I guess. I've seen 2 iterations of Willy Wonka so far. This is obviously a different period in his life.
Yeah.
I think that obviously the Gene Wilder version of Willy Wonka is the ultimate.
Untouchable.
However, I do think that there are good moments in the Tim Burton version, despite the fact that I would never elect to watch that one over the original. But I still think that there's some funny moments, some good performances, and especially if you're a fan of the book, I think there's some great parts that fix some of the changes that were made in the Gene Wilder version. But I'm done. Like, I've seen the story, and in terms of the bigger extended world of Willy Wonka, I don't care. Part of what makes Willy Wonka so great is that he's a mystery, and that he is this kind of eccentric character that doesn't need explaining and origins and things like that. He's just weird, and it's not really about him. It's about the impact that he has on others. So to make an origin story for Willy Wonka, it's kind of like, I don't really want that.
That's a very astute insight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's almost like I'm a media teacher.
I like that idea of how recognizing when you don't need more of a character. Yeah, I've struggled to pinpoint what I'm not so interested in. I do think it's the look of the film. But that said, it's directed by the guy who made the Paddington films, and I love the Paddington films.
Especially Paddington 2.
Yeah. Both of them are great, though.
But Paddington 2 has Hugh Grant, and Hugh Grant is amazing in it. However, I have no desire to see Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa in the new Wonka film.
Based on going, well, I loved Paddington, but this one I'm not interested in. It's possible that you could be proven wrong from the film.
It's always possible that I could be proven wrong, and I hope that I am.
Yeah. Do you think you'll ever sit down and watch this film, though?
If people tell me it's worth the watch, I will.
Yeah.
But there's already so many films that I'm desperate to see that would rank before this. I'm not going to go out of my way to watch this. Like, I don't even have a curiosity about it. It would only be if someone was like, actually, it turned out to be quite good. You should go see it.
Well, this one, I believe, is currently set up to be one of the big Christmas releases. Last year's big one was Avatar. I did see it, but I will never watch it again. Even if it gets nominated as a film club.
Sorry, Jave.
This one, Javier was saying today, it might get pushed back because of the actors' strike, because they can't promote it and stuff like that. There's actually quite a few films. So yeah, this one is slated for that Christmas release. If nothing else is on at the cinemas and I'm desperate to see something, I might go see it at the time. But yeah, not overly interested either.
Speaking of the actors' strike, by the way, before we move on, Ethan comes to me, because I'm teaching Ethan now, he comes to me the other day and he goes, I've got a new segment. He thought it'd be good if we did like a news segment about current events that's going on. And I was very upfront with him. I said, I don't mind that idea, but more often than not, I don't think I have any opinions worth noting about a lot of things that are going on. Even with the actors' strike, every now and then I'm listening into other podcasts to get my updates for it. So I feel like I'd just be regurgitating that information out there.
It's the only time I hear about it, as well as from podcasts that I listen to. The person who hosts the podcast may also be somewhat involved in some way with the strike. I don't keep abreast of the news. So, yeah, no, I don't think I'd have enough content for a section like that.
I said the same thing, but I feel like at the very least, whenever we do have information on stuff like that, we manage to kind of just interject with that kind of stuff anyway. So I feel like without making it an official segment, we're going to end up kind of putting in little bits of pieces of news that we know.
Yep.
Next on my list is this new season of Loki. You're not a Marvel fan. You're certainly not a Marvel TV fan. I really enjoyed the first season of Loki. I think part of that was because it had Owen Wilson in it, and Owen Wilson was just great in it. He dropped a couple of wows. But he's back again, and in particular, the style of the special effects and the CGI in it, they look really cool, and it's a quirky show, and it's different to the same old regurgitated narratives that come up in Marvel. So yeah, it's just a bit of fun, and I think that they're really kind of steering into the quirkiness of it.
Right.
So yeah, that's Loki season 2.
Another trailer I watched, which I won't spend too much time on, was Exorcist Believer, to the point where you've seen it and you're not going to spend any time on it.
No, I am certainly not a believer.
Yeah, not really interested in seeing what this one's about. They have been able to bring back Ellen Barkin. I forget.
Let's say yes.
Yeah, from the original. This is the first time she's made an appearance in any subsequent Exorcist film. I think there's about 4 or 5 in the franchise at this point.
Yeah.
So they have thrown a bit of money at her to get her out of her Exorcist retirement. That's not enough for me to go and check it out. The trailer just makes it look B-grade and not in a good way.
Yeah. Just looks a bit bland.
Yep.
Next for me, Only Murders in the Building, season 3. Turns out they're not only doing Murders in the Building, because this one looks like it's happened at a stage show. So have you watched any Only Murders in the Building?
I started the first season and found Selena Gomez. I just couldn't. Her character really annoyed me.
Really? So
Yeah.
I've never been a fan nor disliked Selena Gomez, just very neutral towards her. But I thought she was great in this. And I mean, I'm a huge Steve Martin and Martin Short fan. I've loved all of their movies and their work over the years. So for them to be working together on something always gets me very excited. But yeah, I like the Selena Gomez character. There's lots of like cameos from other celebrities. I know Paul Rudd's playing a big role in this particular series. So I think there's enough there to have me sufficiently excited.
Nice. Season 2 of the animated series, cartoon, if you will.
I will not.
Of Invincible is on its way, and this is one that a couple of my Year 11 media students who are now Year 12 media students got me onto last year. It's very much on the vibes of The Boys in terms of superheroes who are much more flawed and deeper in complexity than what, atypical superheroes are. Very cool story. And so season 2 trailer landed the other week, and the casting is just stacked in this, like mind-blowing stacked. So with that in mind, I think that we're in for a real treat for season 2. You haven't seen any of that, have you?
I haven't.
Yeah,
no,
I really think you'll like it.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's Invincible.
Cool. Lucky last for me, Saw X. So Saw, the 10th film in the franchise. I don't know if that's including spin-offs or not. It's very hard to keep track of all the Saw films. It's just a gory mess. But I am someone who, may surprise you, I've seen all of the Saw films at some point.
So you saw them?
I saw them, yes. Yes. I would have varying levels of enthusiasm for them. I really don't like the super gruesome violence. There's a morbid curiosity to some of the traps and things like that, but my favorite versions of traps are when you know what's going to happen, but you don't directly see it. Whereas the more they make, the more they're just like, look at this, get a real close-up shot of something disgusting. So that turns me off it more, because I feel like my favorite parts about the franchises were the plot twists and turns and the character motives and the desperation in what the characters were trying to do. All of that stuff really appealed to me. But now that it's embraced more of that torture porn quality to it, that's just a bit
not for me. Like, any horror film that kind of relies a lot on that real graphic horror, like I find it tedious. It sometimes is better to have it inferred rather than explicitly shown.
Sure.
Final one for me is Napoleon. So this is Joaquin Phoenix. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Joaquin,
I think some people say Joaquin. Joaquin Phoenix.
Amateurs.
Playing the role of Napoleon Bonaparte in Ridley Scott's version of Napoleon. Now, this is a script that's been worked for about 30 odd years, because Stanley Kubrick actually was initially set up to do a Napoleon film. And then for a while there, I think Spielberg was going to take it on. Someone else was going to take it on, a big name. It finally landed with Ridley Scott, who we know for the first Alien film. He did Gladiator. He's got hits and misses along the way. The trailer interests me. I will see it. I'm a reluctant participant, though. There's something, it just seems a bit dry, but I'm just hoping for the best on it. When Ridley Scott hits, he hits well. I have a soft spot for Joaquin Phoenix ever since he made the masterpiece Joker.
Why do you do this to me?
Even before that. Like, I like Joker, but like, I'm sure you're going to still appreciate him as an actor, right? You still, there's films he's done that you like.
Yeah, for sure.
So Napoleon, that comes out again. I think that's later in the year. I think that's more towards like a November release. Done.
Cool. Well, at this point, we must do our obligatory like, subscribe, share, comment. Comments are a big one for us. We like comments because it gives us suggestions on things that we can do for the podcast, whether it be new segments, whether it be questions that you just have for us that you'd like us to answer on the podcast, even suggestions for films in future weeks, things like that. That helps us to improve and change and shape the podcast for you guys, the listeners. But yeah, liking and subscribing and sharing it around really helps us in terms of getting the podcast more out there, new audiences and fresh takes too.
Indeed.
On that note, here's looking at you, kids.
Bye, everyone.
See you later, guys.